Hi everyone, welcome to Awkward Author. My name is Alyssa Grasso, and this is my weekly vlog and podcast about my sometimes awkward, always awesome author life. It's been a pretty quiet author life, I guess, this past week, although I will warn you that my chair seems extra squeaky today, so it might not be too quiet when you're listening to this. I'll try not to move around too much, but I just noticed before that I guess I really need to oil it or something because it's extra noisy. Usually doesn't bother me because I work from home and the only one here to hear it is my dog and he doesn't care. Also his hearing's kind of going, so he doesn't really hear it at all. I hear some squeaking now, so hopefully the microphone is not picking it up, but it might be. But this past week, what I've mainly been working on is I've been working on other stuff, but writing-wise, what I've mainly been working on is the outline for my next book. This is the fourth book in the series that I'm working on, the fourth and final book, and this one is going to be the final. I said it was going to be a 3-book series and thought I was working on the final one last book and then realized I wasn't. So, yeah, I've been working on the outline for the fourth book and maybe taking a little bit longer with it. I don't know that I really was taking too long with it, but I was struggling a bit with it because I wanted to make sure that it really is a solid outline. That said, I don't really feel like I have a very detailed outline, but I wanted to make sure plot-wise that it all made sense, that I could wrap everything up and, also, tell hopefully a compelling story in the book, that ties into the other books but kind of has its own thing as well. I guess I wanted to make sure I did that because I struggled so much with the third book and ended up going back at least a couple times, I think, to redo things and really change things around because my first version just wasn't working. So trying not to make things too complicated, but also not too simple so that it's not too boring, as I'm working on this fourth book. And, I think I have it now. I do. I've actually just begun doing the writing, so no real progress to report. I mean, I was just writing a very little bit, but I'm actually into the writing stage, which is good. That's a relief because that means at some point I'll actually finish this book because I was starting to worry there, you can't spend all this time trying to figure out an outline. And I guess, I had a bunch of notes for stuff I wanted to do because as I was working on the last one and making changes to the last one, then I was coming up with, what I wanted to see in this one. And so, I was kind of taking those and then, coming up with a full novel outline, I guess I will say. Like I said, it's not a super detailed outline. Definitely some of the outlines I've written in the past have been more detailed. But hopefully, it'll work and it'll, I'll be able to actually get through the writing of this without having to go back and change everything around. We'll see. Like I said, I've only just begun the writing, so we'll see how it goes. But yeah, what I ended up doing, which is not how I would normally outline a book, but I had all these different things that I wanted to have happen in the book, different scenes that I want to make sure were in the book. This is something I think it's definitely in a screenwriting book. I think it's in Save the Cat, where, one of the strategies suggested is to take a bunch of index cards and, on the index card, write a scene that you want in the movie. Movies are done in scenes where books have scenes too, but a lot of times you think of them more as in chapters, which isn't, could have more than one scene in a chapter. Anyway, I basically took the scene approach. I didn't have index cards. I mean, I don't know. Maybe there's a package of index cards somewhere in this office, but I don't know where they are. What I did have was Post-it notes. So, shout out to the 3M Corporation. I took a couple of pads of Post-it notes and just, wrote down very quickly, a description of what had to happen in that scene, and then had all these Post-it notes, and then put them in order of, how the novel would have to go, and, where there were gaps. Obviously, there's going to be gaps if I wasn't, well, maybe not obviously, but the way I was writing these scenes out, there were definitely gaps, and then take those and, fill in those gaps with stuff that logically makes sense to get you from point A to point B kind of thing. Yeah, I mean, you could do all that in Scrivener. Obviously, you could do that on the computer. And basically, I did transfer all that stuff over to Scrivener. But for me, I don't know why. When I'm planning out a book, when I'm planning out an outline, I like to have. It's just easier for me to write, like to do it the old-fashioned way with pen and paper. I don't know why, but for some reason, not writing. I would never even attempt to try to write with pen and paper. That would be a nightmare. I mean, it would just take forever. My hand would get all cramped up. Yeah, no way. But, as far as plotting out a book, writing out an outline, I do like to do that initially, pen and paper. For some reason, that works better for me. So I don't know. I don't know what the reason is for that, but anyway, yeah, I was able to get all those Post-it notes in order, fill in any gaps that I have, and now transfer all that over to Scrivener. So now that's what I'm working from. Have a pretty, to me, I mean, a solid outline. I don't know if I would say complete. I guess it's a complete outline, but it's not detailed outline. How's that? And yeah, so I've just started writing it. I don't know how long it's going to take me. I mean, I'm always over ambitious when I estimate this stuff. I don't know why, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'd love to be able to have it done by the end of February, but realistically, probably the end of March by the time I'm actually done with the book. We'll see. Maybe, I'll surprise myself and get it done faster, but 2 months I feel like is enough time to finish a book when I'm not working on anything else writing wise. And I mean, I'm working on other stuff life wise, so day job wise, day business wise, so we'll see. But I do want to really be focused on it and try to get this out because at some point I would like to actually publish this series instead of just talking about it and working on it. And finishing the draft is only step one for this because there's still so many steps involved in getting this into a publishable book series. So I got my work cut out for me. If you spend any time online, social media, then you probably know the big scandal this week in book Twitter. The big drama was a book that was selected. It's been selected for multiple book lists. I guess the big drama was that Oprah selected it for her new book club, or new, I mean, I don't know if it's new, but her current book club. And it's a book called American Dirt, and it's written about, I think it's like Mexican American experience. I don't know. I'm not even sure if it takes place in Mexico or it takes place in the U.S. or some parts in Mexico, some parts in the U.S. or that's the general gist of it. It's like a an immigration type story. The scandal is that the person who wrote it is not writing from personal experience, and so people have questioned, was she the best person to maybe write this book, and does the book kind of it's a work of fiction, so of course stuff is made up, but does it kind of like sensationalize stuff and dramatize stuff to the point where it's almost like a caricature of of Mexican American life or what. So there's a lot of claims that the book is racist or maybe not done with the most sensitive touch, I guess. And I guess the big issue is that you have a white writer writing from a perspective that she may not be entirely familiar with. And this is something that comes up again and again, in the fiction community, because fiction is always a work of fiction. And there's different degrees of fiction. There's realistic fiction, which American Dirt is meant to be. You're writing from it's current times. It's it could be taking place right now, and so I think the general thought is it's something you should have some knowledge of and be familiar with. Write what you know is the classic adage. But then fiction, there's all kinds of fiction. There's historical fiction, which can be research, but then there's science fiction, which is oftentimes set in the future. I mean, obviously you have near future SF and far future SF and everything in between. But science fiction, I think we can generally assume is pretty much made up. Now, it should have maybe some basis in science. I don't know if you should say it's realistic, because no science fiction is technically realistic. It is made up. But obviously, if you're talking about, space travel or time travel or something that doesn't actually exist, nobody's going to have, most likely nobody has any experience of it. If they do, that's news to me. Or something like fantasy, of course, which is, completely made up. I mean, it's not even I don't, fantasy is not based on, where science fiction, you should have some basis in science, although it can be pretty limited, pretty tenuous there. But, fantasy is completely made up, and it's, unicorns and magic and all that kind of stuff. Although you'll still see, people saying that stuff isn't historically accurate in a fantasy novel, and, complaining about stuff that to them isn't historically accurate, which, of course, it's fantasy. I mean, nothing is historically accurate in fantasy. It's not meant to be. But so there's, obviously, you don't expect somebody to have direct experience with magic or with time travel or something like that when they're writing one of those books. And so the argument is, well, if you can write about, magic and time travel, can you write about people that are, other than, you, whose experiences might differ from you? And of course, nobody wants to write the story of their life over and over and over again. I mean, the story of your life is a memoir, and, and not that there's anything wrong with writing memoirs, but if you're writing fiction, you want to have different stories. And of course, you're going to write about different characters. And so if you're writing about someone who, comes from a different background than you, which you're going to from time to time, does that open you up to criticism? And I mean, I don't have an answer. I don't have, the magic answer that we all want, but it is something to think about as you're, considering what book to write. And, you might have a great idea for a book, but you have to at some point ask yourself, maybe, is this something I should write? Am I the right person to write that book? And sometimes the answer is no. I know back when I was, still working on YA stuff, which, not to say that I wouldn't write YA stuff again, but I remember having an idea for a book, and it was a good idea for a book, but it concerned characters in, I guess, who had a different experience than I did. I'll just, they, were very religious, very Christian religious, which I was raised Christian. Not that I'm not Christian, I guess, but I'm certainly not an active Christian at this time, and I'm certainly not, I was never as, super religious as the characters in this book were going to be, for it to all, make sense, I guess what we would call, evangelical Christian, or when I was a kid, we called it born again Christian, that kind of religion. And so for me to write from that perspective would have been maybe not appropriate. And so it was a good idea for a book. It might still be a good idea. There might be someone out there who's written it or written another book like that. But for me, it wasn't the book that I was meant to write. And so that idea got, put in the pile of ideas for not now and maybe never kind of thing. And there's lots of ideas like that for whatever reason, I've decided not to, write the book. Not necessarily because, I wouldn't be the appropriate person to write it, but maybe because it just wasn't something that I had a strong enough attachment to, or something that I felt, would add anything, would be something that people would want to read. I don't know. It's a tough call. It definitely is when you're deciding what to write. Now, I will say about American Dirt, the author who wrote it, this was not her first book. I'm thinking it might be her fourth. I don't remember. She got a huge advance for the book, 7 figures reportedly. That's pretty nice. So, this is not... A lot went into this book, from the publisher's perspective, and so they really felt very strongly about it. And apparently, it made Oprah's list, so that's always a huge, to get picked by Oprah's, you're guaranteed to be a bestseller when that happens. So, and Oprah's made some questionable decisions in the past, too, so that have sparked some controversy. So we'll just say that. But you know, obviously she's human. I'm human, you're human, and you know, so is the author of American Dirt, and it's just it's an interesting choice that the publisher decided that book was what was needed, and that was the author to write it. So you can't entirely blame the author, because the publisher obviously was behind it, and we don't know like what the perspective, you know, what happened here, because it could have been that she was asked to write a book on this subject, especially someone who's had multiple books out there. You know, a publisher might say, well, this is what we're looking for, and we want you to write this book. So, you know, let's not lay all the blame on the author for, you know, picking her subject matter as she did. And, you know, obviously the publisher felt that, you know, the book was worthy of publication, worthy of a large advance, and so it's kind of an interesting choice by the publisher, and especially in this time of, you know, the rallying cry of we need diverse books. You know, is a book like American Dirt what really is meant by diverse books? So even though the characters and the subject matter are diverse, you know, the author maybe not so much. And do we pick an author like that to tell this story in such, you know, in times when people are looking for more authentic voices, own voices, kind of books? So it's an interesting thing. I don't have an answer, by the way. I'm not really taking a side on this or anything, but it's just interesting to observe, you know, as an author, as someone who, you know, considers, you know, what she writes and tries to, you know, think about, you know, characters and how to present them in a way that obviously isn't offensive to people. And also I've found in, you know, more recent works, I'm more reluctant to get into, you know, physical descriptions of people, because I'd rather the reader, you know, make that choice, unless it's, you know, pertinent to the story in some way, you know, what somebody's, you know, race or you know, physical appearance is. There really doesn't need to be that, you know. I mean, obviously there are times when it matters to the story. I don't know, maybe you have some thriller and, you know, you have two people that look alike, so you need to show that they look alike so they could be mistaken for each other, or you need a character who's short, you know, because, you know, the killer was obviously a tall man, and so it couldn't have been this, you know, 5-foot person or something. I don't know, but you know, sometimes there are reasons you need to get into the physical description because of your, you know, it actually matters to the story, it's actually relevant. And other times it's like, you know, why do we need that? And so it's something I've actually consciously thought about in my writing, and I don't know, what are your thoughts on it? Because I know everybody has, you know, different thoughts on stuff like, you know, physical description, and also, you know, choosing, you know, what to write about and who to write about. And we all have, you know, our own experiences of life, and that can be very different. And not just, you know, I'm not just talking about like, you know, race or ethnicity or something, just, you know, where you live, because honestly, you know, I am from New Jersey. I have lived just about my whole life in either New Jersey or far eastern Pennsylvania, where, you know, at least for the past, 10 years, just about, I've lived like a mile from New Jersey. So, and that's a particular way of life. I mean, it's a very different culture, I think, than, you know, say if you grew up, you know, in Kansas, or, you know, I don't know, North Dakota or something. Like, that's a certain way of life and a certain culture too. I mean, you know, it's very different. It's a very different situation. I've traveled to other places, and so I know, like, you know, the way things are where I'm from is very different from how it is in other parts of just this country. And so, you know, being, you know, a white American from New Jersey, you know, from Hackensack, New Jersey, is very different than being a white American from, say, like Portland, Maine or something, which isn't even that far away. But it's a very different experience, and I don't know. I think about that too in my writing, and even even generational differences. Like, I know when the Netflix show Stranger Things came out, it's set in the 1980s. It's set pretty much. I'm pretty much about the age those kids were, as far as the 1980s. When if this was a contemporary thing, I would be the age of those kids, kind of thing. And so, the lifestyle that we had as kids in the 1980s is very different than the lifestyle kids have now. And I know, when that show came out, kids of, younger generations now were like, well, this isn't realistic. Like, parents wouldn't just let kids, wander around town on their own, and they would know where they were at all times. And it's like, well, no, like, that's not how it was when I was a kid. I walked to school by myself. I, went to the park or, whatever, played with my friends. Like, we didn't, there was no adult supervision. I mean, obviously when we were home, most likely adults were there, but they didn't know where we were during the day. And, that was just how it was. And it's a very different culture now. Obviously, everyone's got phones. You can track people all the time, and it's very unlikely that a parent wouldn't know like where their kid was. If they did, they'd probably be alarmed. But that wasn't the case back in the day. And so even I think about that now, like, going back and writing, YA or writing something from a younger perspective, I don't really have the same experience that kids today have. So when, and I'm not a parent either. So that's another disadvantage I have writing from that young person's perspective. Things are very different nowadays for kids than it was when I was growing up. So there's just all these different experiences, and that doesn't mean that you can't write about other experiences, but to avoid dating your work or, to make things realistic, you may want to, talk to people who have had, experiences. And I see all the time people on Twitter asking, okay, parents of middle school kids, would it be realistic that a middle school child would know such and such a word or would be familiar with this or that or whatever? Because, they're trying to write a book, and they're wondering if like their book is, is it too dated? Is it not realistic? So, it's, thankfully we do have social media, so it is pretty easy to do some very basic research on questions like that. But it's just an interesting thing to think about. I'm rambling here, but those are just some thoughts I have as I'm writing stuff, and maybe is one of the reasons I've switched up to, writing a little bit older, writing for people more my age or, thereabouts, as opposed to writing for kids, because my experiences now are just so different, the experiences of kids growing up today. And so, just some thoughts, and again, even like setting. I don't usually set my books in a specific town, but I do generally pick an area. So I pick New Jersey, or I pick Pennsylvania, or I pick somewhere I know, because I don't really know what life is like in Texas or, North Dakota or, somewhere else in this country. And certainly not like what it would be like in another country, because my experiences are kind of limited to, where I live currently, which is different. It's definitely a different experience, I know. And with the internet and stuff, I think things have become a little bit more homogenized, but it's not quite the same thing, I know. And even where I live now, I mean, even though I'm like a mile from New Jersey, it's definitely very different. I mean, I'm out in the woods here, I'm out in the country, whereas, when I was a kid, I was, in the New York suburbs. I mean, we had trees, but there weren't that many of them, and there were a lot of people and a lot of cars, and it's a very different, things look very different and are very different than how they are out here even, and it's not even that far away. So everyone has, I guess, different experiences. My boyfriend always makes fun of me, like, when we're watching like a movie or a show or something, and there's like kids riding a school bus. Like, I don't know what show it was. It was something, they supposedly lived in Los Angeles, I think it was, or right outside Los Angeles or something like that. And they had a school bus picking up kids. And I'm like, do they really have school buses out there? Like, because I never rode a school bus until I was like, lived out in the country. And I don't know what it's like in California. They may have school buses even in Los Angeles. I don't know. But I grew up in the suburbs of New York City. There were no school buses. You have to go out to the country for school buses. Otherwise, kids walk to school or mom and dad drives them or something. There's no other, if you're in a city, in New York City or like Jersey City or Hoboken or something like that, there's public transportation too, but there's not school buses. That's a country thing to me. And so, I'm always like, questioning things in movies when you see kids getting out of school bus and they don't look like they live in an area where they would have school buses. And my boyfriend laughs because he grew up in an area with school buses, so he's been like riding school buses since he was in like kindergarten, which just boggles my mind. But yeah, it's just, that's how different experiences are. And anyway, that's just me rambling. So that's just something to think about as you're working on a book or thinking about what you're going to be working on next. And anyway, I'd love to hear if you had some thoughts on this subject. Let me know. And I am going to sign off there. I have a book to work on, so I might have to, get some writing done. We'll see if I can make some actual progress, because I would like to finish this series at some point. So thank you, as always, for listening to my rambles or watching my video, and I will be back again next week with a new episode of Awkward Author. And in the meantime, hopefully I'll get some writing done, and hopefully you will too. So have a great week, everyone, and I will talk to you all again soon. If you would like to know more about me, you can visit my website, which is alyssagrosso.com. That's ALISSAGROSSO.com, or you can visit awkwardauthor.com. And so I will see you guys again soon. Take care, everyone. Bye for now.